Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My amendment prohibits funding for the Climate Change Center at the Department of Transportation. This center has recently been reinstated and expanded under the Biden administration to meet the DOT's goals in responding to the climate crisis. The Climate Change Center creates comprehensive and multimodal approaches to reduce transportation-related greenhouse gases and to improve the resilience of the transportation system to climate change impacts. This center announces and promotes woke grant programs that give U.S. taxpayers hard-earned dollars to woke universities and nonprofits to research the decarbonization of the transportation sector and to address adverse environmental impacts created by the transportation system. Never forget, the goal of the Democrats is to take away every single gas and diesel engine, every single combustion engine, and force Americans to drive electric vehicles if they can't afford them. While they claim they care about the climate and the environment, they do not care about toxic batteries and where they will be disposed. But they want to use unlimited taxpayer funds to address a climate crisis that does not exist because the climate has always changed. It's not something new. This also works with DOT agencies to implement climate change criteria for grant programs, to devise climate training programs, and to facilitate climate change education campaigns for its 50,000 employees across the department. For example, the center is working with the Department of Commerce's National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration to deliver climate information and support to transportation planners and stakeholders to enhance the safety, effectiveness, equity, and resilience of the U.S. transportation infrastructure. These climate educational training programs are for the U.S. DOT employees to develop a standard of language for use in performance plans for staff engaged in climate change activities. The entire center is a complete abuse of U.S. taxpayer dollars and should be defunded immediately. Mr. Speaker, I reserve my time.
Gentleman from Georgia reserves. For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois seek recognition?
Mr. Chair, I claim time in opposition.
Gentleman is recognized.
My friends across the aisle can turn a blind eye to the wildfires, smoke-covered skies, life-threatening heat waves, and extreme weather we now face nearly every day somewhere in this nation. We are seeing the impacts of climate change in real time, and yet this amendment would hamstring our ability to meaningfully address the accelerating threat of climate change. Ignoring climate change and our approach to the transportation sector would be particularly egregious and irresponsible. It is quite frankly not an option. Our transportation infrastructure is responsible for more greenhouse emissions than any other sector of our economy. This means that our approach to transportation investment can and must be one of the biggest parts of the solution. Climate change also makes our roads, bridges, and railways and public transit more vulnerable to damage from extreme weather. And we have to recognize our climate reality in order to make our infrastructure more resilient and less costly. Instead of rebuilding the same old infrastructure after disrepair, we should be investing in climate-conscious, cost-effective solutions that ensure we build back stronger in order to equip our infrastructure to withstand the test of time and future disasters. This is a matter of practicality, risk mitigation, and human safety. It also presents a tremendous opportunity to boost our economy by investing in new technologies and creating new jobs. The Department of Climate Change Center is the agency's hub for research, policy analysis, partnerships, and action on climate change. I suppose some of my Republican colleagues are targeting it because they don't believe climate change is real, and unfortunately, we cannot have a productive debate when one side chooses to ignore scientific evidence and consensus. But, Mr. Chairman, it is the functional equivalent of standing in the middle of an expressway, closing one's eyes and saying, "There are no trucks. Trucks are coming." This is disheartening and puts our future at great risk. I wholeheartedly support the Department of Transportation's efforts to create comprehensive approaches to reduce transportation-related greenhouse gases and improve the resilience of the transportation system. I believe the American people support the cost savings, clean air, new jobs, and healthy environmental future that will come with working to achieve our climate goals. With that, I strongly urge my colleagues to vote no on this amendment and reserve.
Gentleman from Illinois reserves. The gentlelady from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The DOT Climate Change Center is nothing more than an extension of the Green New Deal and just another waste of hard-earned taxpayer money to enforce the Green New Deal, forcing Americans to be transitioned over to electric vehicles, which they do not want. I thought this was the land of freedom. I thought this was the land where Americans can pick and choose what they would like to buy and what they do not want to buy. But the Green New Deal and the Democrats' willingness to use the government to force Americans against their will to transition over to electric vehicles is nothing more than tyranny. Here's an example of what comes out of this Climate Change Center. The Biden-Harris administration making $100 million available to improve EV charger reliability. That was announced on September 13th, 2023. Here's a perfect example about how the Climate Change Center is being used to force Americans to drive electric vehicles, which is their goal the entire time. The federal government's role is not to change how people spend their dollars and what they choose to buy for transportation. What the federal government's role, especially when it comes to the Department of Transportation, should be making sure that our roads are drivable, that our bridges are in good condition. And by the way, electric vehicles are heavy. That would put an undue burden on our bridges and on our roads. This is what they should be focused on, not the lie that all of a sudden climate change is real. We've had tornadoes since the beginning of time. We've had earthquakes since the beginning of time. We've had hurricanes since the beginning of time. This is not a new change in weather patterns. It is not a climate crisis. It's just called weather, and it has to do with seasons. And another thing, the Biden administration has no right to lie to the American people and make the American people fund their lives. Mr. Speaker, how much time do I have remaining?
You have 30 seconds, ma'am.
30 seconds I'd like to reserve. Thank you.
Gentlelady from Georgia reserves. The gentleman from Illinois is recognized.
Stating the obvious, Mr. Chairman, that if what the Department of Transportation's only purpose is to make sure that our roads and our rail systems are safe, the underlying bill as proposed dramatically reduces all the funds that do that and makes our rail systems and our highway systems far less safe. So to say that in the middle of a discussion on an amendment that has nothing to do with that is ridiculous, and it's for the reason I ask my colleagues to oppose this amendment, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My amendment prohibits funds from being used for the Department of Transportation Climate Change Center because it is a complete waste of taxpayer money. We're over $33 trillion in debt, Mr. Speaker. The American people cannot afford their money to be wasted and spent on lies. We need the federal government to spend the Americans' hard-earned taxpayer dollars on good roads, good bridges, and good infrastructure. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield.
All time has expired.